This is a short discussion of Pathwork Lecture 233, The Power of the Word. And there was a topic for October of 2017. Study guides on my website, jenrigsby.com and jenrigsby.org. So the power of the word. The guide uses a lot of poetry to describe the energy that the word represents. So I want to differentiate here between the word or the words we use and the energy behind them. In pathwork, the concept is that energy follows consciousness. That first there is a thought, and then there is an energy that builds because of that thought. The lecture presents the idea that the word is a crystallization of this consciousness and energy. So if you think of an iceberg, the word is the tip of the iceberg, but it's what we have in our hands. It's what we are fully conscious of. But underneath the surface of the word is the majority of the iceberg is under the water. The majority of the energy and consciousness of a word may not be fully apparent. The reason for describing it this way is that even if we select the wrong word, in communication with each other, we can still understand the intent. We can still suss out the energy of what the communication was supposed to be about. This is one of the reasons why many people have a hard time with emails. They just can't add back in the dimension of energy. When we are guessing at what the energy of someone's communication is, we are guessing from our perspective instead of being present for theirs. I am someone who is guilty of enjoying email because it's more clear and more precise, and at least I know what I said. Whereas verbally, I'm a little bit sloppy. These presentations are hard for me because I know that I have a positive intent to help and serve, and sometimes my words strike me as word salad. Sometimes my sentences and my points, from my perspective, when I look at them, they don't make sense. But apparently, and I say this because of objective feedback, apparently my energy fills in the gaps. That people are able to sense the energy behind my communication and forgive the fact that in a strict transcript, it's not very impressive sometimes. This happens every day in conversations with other people. And perhaps you have noticed when you read a transcript how dry and lifeless it is and how it doesn't convey. So in court cases, very often, they'll read a transcript into evidence and people say, yeah, but that's not what happened. What they're talking about there is that the words when they're written on paper in two-dimensional form, miss the 3, 4, 5-dimensional form of the energy and the intent that was behind those words. Same thing happens with scripts, with playwriting scripts and movie scripts, television scripts, is the words themselves don't give you the life that is within that character, that human being. So that's a little bit about how the guide describes the energy of the word, which gives it its power. During the weekly meetings, sometimes people would say, but what is the word? What is my word? What is the word for this situation? That is an attempt to make the power of the word linear. That's an attempt to make the final result hold the entire meaning of the process. The The phrase, the power of the word, is generic. It's about how much power a word can contain, not about the ultimate power the word itself can own, can have, can wield, with or without the energy behind it. So the power of the word comes from our thought process and our energy, and it is magnified by our choice of words. Sometimes we say silly things when we don't mean them. We can be nervous or tense, and without realizing it, try to lighten things up inappropriately. And sometimes people are offended by that. This was a serious situation and you made a joke. The word itself, the words themselves, then don't carry the power, because we ourselves are confused. We are conflicted as we speak the words. The words we speak aren't weapons unless there is a tremendous energy force behind them. Then what someone might say is not, well, that's inappropriate or that's silly. They might genuinely be offended or hurt and angry in response. So the power of the word and what it's carrying may not be fully apparent until it is said. And that's part of what this lecture is about, is the importance of saying the words and noticing the reactions, noticing how words feel, how they are bounced around, how you react to words, so that your words will better represent what you actually feel. Once your words represent what you actually feel, that's when they contain power. Now, one aspect of this is that sometimes our words go out of date. In other words, think of it like history, where we understood history one way and then we find out more information over the decades and we reinterpret history. Now, imagine that the memorials that we put up to a certain person or event are like the words that we create. And then we wind up having a different understanding of that event. While there are some of these in the news, I'm not talking about anything in specific. This has gone on since time memorial. That is a pun on the word memorial. It has gone on throughout human history that a monument put up by one generation or dynasty gets pulled down by the next. Sometimes it's a power struggle. And the monument represents a declaration of power. It's like a word. And the next dynasty wants to tear down that word and put up their own version of power, their own version of the word. Like that, different words can mean different things, even though technically, if you go to the dictionary, they read the same way. But our understanding of that word and our focus on that word change. So I have found it a very useful practice to, let me start that sentence over. I have found it a very useful practice when I am working with someone and I hear the same word over and over and over again in an area that's not working out for them. So there are two aspects here. One is we have a favorite word, and that part of our life goes very well and the word feels appropriate. We don't work there. I'm talking about an area where it's as if they're using the word as a lifeline to hold on to something, but there is disharmony around that. There is pain or distress, not being met by others, being misunderstood. I have learned when I hear a word 3 or 4 times, I literally go to an online dictionary and I look up the word with the client or student. And it is common for us to find out that there was a misinterpretation in that word, a misunderstanding, a misapplication. Or sometimes there was a narrowing of the word to mean only one part of the word. And it is that forcing current, that narrowing, that creates the problem. As if I say, I want pie, and someone gives me a berry pie, and I get angry. That's not pie, I want pie. And they give me a custard pie. No, I don't want that, I want pie. My inability to find the right word to describe what I want can create tremendous frustration. If instead I do self-analysis of my own, and I find out why in my childhood the only pie my mother ever made was deep dish apple pie, then I can understand how the word pie became a synonym for deep dish apple pie. It doesn't include any other pie. And when I am stressed or upset and I cry out for comfort food and I cry for pie, it's not a generic pie as understood by other people. It's a word I associate with happiness in my childhood. It's a very subjective word that in my use of it. But it is heard by others as generic. In the realm of desserts, she would like pie. And there are hundreds and thousands of types of pie. Now, I'm using a not silly, but simple, everyday example here. Some of the words that came up during this month were loyalty, acceptance. Even the word love can be used to mean a very narrow sliver, a very narrow range of love. And if it doesn't meet that need, it is not love. If someone uses the word love or understands the word love only in the context of a very narrow sliver of human feeling and emotion and activity, then they're going to disparage love of other kinds. And when we disparage love, it is not uncommon that a deeper love does not come to us. In other words, we have muddied the water by being insistent that the word carry the energy we want it to carry and refusing the interpretation of others. In that rejection of others, we disconnect ourselves. And disconnection is not conducive to loving relationships. So those are just 2 examples where an internal consciousness of love and an energy that builds around and chooses a word to represent a subjective need or a specific need can actually isolate us from other people who understand the word differently or in a larger context. So words can go out of date. Words can fail to represent new understandings. Words can actually represent a misunderstanding of a concept. And we cling to that, we hold on to it. So 2 points here. One is the energy around the words that we use are made up of our consciousness and the energy that generates around that consciousness. And the second is that our words are not science. They're not mathematical formulas. They are our best effort when we try to communicate with others. A second portion of this lecture was about the energy of unspoken words. What the guide says is the majority of our communication in word form happens inside our own minds. So if you had any way to add up all the words you've ever heard, the guide's suggesting that 90% of the words you've ever heard in your entire life were your words spoken inside your head to yourself. So if we look at the title of this lecture, The Power of the Word, the suggestion is that you may be unaware of the majority of communication you have being inside you about, not about you necessarily, but based on your own understanding that isn't necessarily shared verbally with others. So the power of the unspoken word is you haven't had the opportunity to speak these words and have someone say, please clarify, or I don't understand, or gee, that sounds sad, what do you mean by that? Or I don't agree with you, let's talk about it. Inside our own minds, it's a closed system. And we may be feeding our own prejudices, feeding our own fears, feeding our own misunderstandings without as much opportunity for objective feedback. Another aspect of the energy of unspoken words is when we quietly call ourselves names or derogate ourselves. So if 50 times a day I'm a clumsy person, I drop things, I trip, I lose my balance, have all my life. If every time my physicality was not perfect, I called myself stupid and clumsy, imagine how that would build up over decades and decades of my life. You can't help but have an invisible sense of being stupid and clumsy if you've heard yourself called that your entire life. And the guide is suggesting that you become conscious of negative vicious circles, of negative name calling, of negative conclusions. This is part of the self-analysis that Pathwork suggests. And you find those unspoken words, and you find the courage to speak them and find out what they are. Very often, that's all it takes. Once you realize that you're calling yourself stupid and clumsy, and I choose this example because I did realize this at some point. And the more my consciousness came up, the more it was crystal clear the words stupid, clumsy were in my consciousness 5 or 10 times a day. And then you can deal with that. Now, one of the ways I dealt with that is I asked the question, what would love do here? I was taught this by Pathwork. What would love do here? Is it loving, Jan, to call yourself stupid and clumsy because you bumped a glass, because you spilled a few drops? Would you do that to anyone else? And the answer was no. I don't treat other people like that. I try to accept their imperfections and work with. And so the invitation becomes, okay, can you do that for yourself? Can you be kind and loving to yourself for your imperfections, for being careless, for being human? That was a long process. I still do it. And I have to compensate. I have a little internal discussion with myself. Stupid and clumsy. Yes, we know, Jan. We know that was perhaps stupid and clumsy, but let's not call ourselves names. It's not that bad. Take a look at this. And by the way, what can you do to not continue to be as clumsy as you are? well, I could think before I act. That would be good. It's as if there's a little part of you that's still a kid. And our job is to develop our inner kid and say, it's okay, honey, I know you spilled the milk, but you're a grown woman now, and you know where the cleaner is, and you know how to clean floors, you even know how to clean carpets. You can handle this. How about if we're kind to this flaw in this imperfection in you, and just work with it? So, this is about the energy of unspoken words and how much power they have, and we may not be fully conscious that we are speaking them. And then another section was about the power of choosing different words. Now, in this place, people often think of affirmations. I tread carefully here because I do not wish to disparage affirmations. But this is how I look at the practice of writing or saying affirming statements. Number one, they need to be true. And secondly, if you put a Band-Aid on a wound with all the love and care and in positive intent, but the wound is still active, it's not going to heal the wound. So an affirmation needs to be very carefully prescribed to fit a given situation, to not be unrealistic, to not be an immature desire for perfection. And secondly, an affirmation needs to recognize that it can't solve a problem, but it can ease the effects of an issue that has been resolved. So, in other words, it doesn't matter where my stupid and clumsy thought came from. I carried it. It is important to address the source of that, my fear that it is true, that makes me want to harshly criticize anything that seems to fit that diagnosis. That's what's causing the word. That fear is my consciousness, which creates the energy of harsh critique that jumps at any evidence that that might be true. Trying to get rid of the last stage when the first stage is still active is an invitation to failure. The pathwork process is about continuing throughout your life to go deeper, to find the hidden unconscious causes for negative actions. Keep in mind that a lot of our lives are positive and fine. Doesn't matter how much trouble you have in the moment. It is very important to look at the wider picture and say, well, in the wider picture, yes, A, B, and C are good, G, F, I, X, Y, Z. K, I have a problem with. And then, yes, we do zero in, we do focus on the areas of our life where we have problems. It is important to do so. It is also important to realize that it is the rest of our life, the positive rest of our life, the ability to live independently, the ability to work and earn a living, the ability to have friends, and then there's one friendship that doesn't work. To realize that we want to work on negative, disharmonious events without slandering our entire lives. So the idea is that we can choose different words. And as we choose different words, the energy will shift if our intention is clean and the original cause has been either addressed or identified. It can still be active, and we can still be attempting to shift the power away from, in my case, of calling myself stupid and clumsy, to shift it away from criticism and at some point turn it into a joke. dropping the word stupid, because that's not funny, but clumsy. So at one point I read a phrase by a columnist, a comic columnist, and she used the phrase, "I'm the kind of kid that trips over the seams in linoleum when I cross the room." And I laughed at that, and I realized that's my impression of myself. If there's anything sticking up at all, I will trip over it. I can recast that into being a very sensitive person who sees the lines in the linoleum tiles on the floor. Okay? I can tease and joke with that. I can lighten up my criticism by saying, you're seeing things that other people don't see. It's okay for you to want to address that. But it's not seen by other people. It's not a huge glaring flaw, your occasional wobbles and you're bumping into things. It changes the power of that criticism into advice, concern, loving support of something that I may wish to address or something I cannot address, but I wish to stop being negative about. So these are all elements in Patrick Lecture 233, The Power of the Word. It is a lecture that is easily read and understood outside of Pathwork jargon and Pathwork concepts. So there are 4 or 5 lectures in the canon of Pathwork lectures that you can hand to someone, and without any prior knowledge of Pathwork, they read it, makes sense to me. So it's very pleasurable, and it's also very useful. The online dictionary that I use, my personal preference, is American Heritage Dictionary. And I like it because, for whatever reason, it's short. The definitions are quite short. And they are broad enough in their scope so that I can usually identify where the interpretation has become too specific, or that they're using the 4th or 5th definition and ignoring the first one. I'll give you an example. Last night we talked about the word acceptance. A lot of people have trouble with the word acceptance. They think that acceptance means endorsement. Acceptance means approval. Acceptance means surrender. But in this dictionary, the first definition of the word acceptance meant to receive something that was offered. I invite you to hear the difference between endorsement, approval, surrender, and to receive something that was offered. I accept your apology. Simply means I accept your apology. It doesn't include in that moment forgiveness. It doesn't include approval of your actions. It doesn't endorse anything. The simple acceptance. But when acceptance is loaded up with these other words, acceptance becomes the final step in a process. Once I accept, there's nothing I can do. So as part of the power of the word, it can be very useful once you hear yourself saying the same word over and over and over again, or someone else says a word repetitively. Look it up. See if you can discern where the use of the word is intended to mean something that the broader range of the word does not fully support. Not technically wrong, but we're loading the word with extra meaning that it doesn't carry. And the goal here is to find different words, to choose different words to express ourselves, and to not be afraid of words because we understand them one way and other people may not understand them that way. So again, short summary of Patrick Lecture 233, Power of the Word. I hope you take a look at it and read it. You may download it from pathwork.org, the main site for the International Pathwork Foundation. Thank you.